Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. The first time Rebecca Temitope laid eyes on Victor Obi, it was at Galaxy Cinemas, a popular movie theater in the heart of Ondala City. She hadn't planned on going out that evening. In fact, she was tired, worn out from yet another unsuccessful job hunt, and all she wanted was to go home and bury herself under her blanket. But her best friend Anita had insisted. "You need to relax, Becca. You can't keep sulking over jobs that aren't calling you back. Let's go watch a movie and unwind." So she had agreed, reluctantly at first, but by the time they settled in their seats, with a tub of popcorn between them, she was feeling much better. That was when Victor walked in. Even in the dim glow of the theater, he stood out effortlessly. Tall, with broad shoulders and a confident stride, he carried himself with the kind of ease that came from knowing he was a man who commanded attention. His neatly trimmed beard framed his sharp jawline, and his skin was the deep, rich shade of brown that gleamed under the theater lights. He was undeniably handsome. Rebecca had barely taken notice of him until he and his friend took 2 seats next to hers. The movie began, and soon she was absorbed in the storyline. But halfway through, the film took an unexpected turn, revealing a plot twist so ridiculous that Rebecca couldn't hold back a laugh. Victor turned to her, amusement flickering in his eyes. "You found that funny?" She nodded, still giggling. "I mean, come on, the villain revealing his entire plan just because he thinks he's won. That's such a cliché," he chuckled. "I was thinking the same thing. But hey, at least it's entertaining." It wasn't love at first sight. In fact, they didn't even exchange numbers that night. But something shifted, something subtle yet undeniable. The next time they saw each other, it was by accident. Rebecca was at a small cafe, Moonlight Bistro, sipping on a cup of coffee when she noticed a familiar figure at the counter. It was Victor. He spotted her too, and after a moment's hesitation he walked over. "What a small world," he said, smiling as he took the seat across from her. From that moment, conversation flowed naturally. They talked about movies, their favorite books, and their childhood memories. Victor told her about his thriving logistics company, Swift Transit Solutions, which he had built from the ground up. His ambition was infectious. He spoke with such passion about his business that Rebecca found herself admiring his drive. In contrast, she felt lost. She confided in him about her job struggles, about how she had sent out countless applications, but received nothing in return. She also mentioned her dream of becoming a successful event planner, but at that moment it seemed like just that, a dream. "You'll get there," Victor had told her, his voice filled with certainty. "You're smart, determined. The right opportunity will come." That evening, as she walked home to the small apartment she shared with her mother, she couldn't help but smile. Victor was interesting, charming, and above all, he listened. As weeks passed, they saw more of each other. Their conversations grew deeper, their connection stronger. He took her on romantic dates, introduced her to his friends, and treated her like a queen d'Obuai the time they officially became a couple. Rebecca was head over heels in love. The first year was like a dream. Victor was generous, showering her with gifts, weekend getaways, and constant reassurance of his love. He called her beautiful every day, held her hand in public, and always made her feel cherished. Rebecca in turn adored him. She went out of her way to make him happy, always looking for ways to support and please him. Then came the second year, and Victor made a suggestion. "Babe, why don't you move in with me?" Rebecca hesitated. She knew what her mother would say. But Victor was persuasive. It's what couples in serious relationships do. "Don't you want to wake up next to me every day?" She felt butterflies at the thought. After much convincing, she spoke to her mother, who was skeptical at first. "Rebecca, are you sure about this? What if things don't work out?" "It will, Mama," she assured her. "Victor loves me. This is just the next step in our journey together." With that, she packed her bags and moved into his sleek, modern apartment in the upscale district of Spring Lake Estate. Living with Victor felt like the right decision, at least in the beginning. She loved cooking for him, ironing his clothes, making the apartment feel like home. He would come back from work and she would be there, waiting for him with a warm meal. She enjoyed playing the role of his wife, even though she wasn't one. But then, subtle changes began. The topic of marriage came up one evening while they were having dinner. "Babe, when do you think we'll get married?" she asked casually, expecting excitement in his response. Instead, Victor smirked, taking another bite of his food. "Why are you bringing this up now?" "Well, we've been together for over 2 years. Rebecca," he cut her off, laughing softly. "Why are you always in a hurry? We're happy, aren't we? Marriage will come when the time is right." It seemed reasonable, so she let it go. But over time, she noticed a pattern. Whenever she brought up the future, he dismissed the conversation, changed the topic, or teased her. And slowly, without even realizing it, she stopped asking. She told herself she had nothing to worry about. Victor loved her. They were building something together. Surely he would propose when he was ready. But if only she knew the truth. Rebecca Temitope had become a wife overnight, without a ring, without a vow, without a promise. She had settled into the role so seamlessly that sometimes even she forgot that nothing truly bound them together. The days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before she realized it, 3 years had passed. 3 years of waking up beside Victor Obi, of preparing his meals before he left for work, of ensuring his clothes were neatly pressed, his apartment spotless, his needs met even before he voiced them. At first it felt fulfilling. She enjoyed being his safe place, the woman who understood him better than anyone else. She assured herself that marriage was just a formality, that their bond was strong enough to last a lifetime. What was a little patience? Then came the 4th year. That was when the whispers started, the subtle but persistent reminders that time was slipping away. Her mother, Mama Temitope, was the first to voice her concerns. One evening, as they sat in the small kitchen of her childhood home in Olusola town, her mother sighed heavily and placed a hand on Rebecca's. "My daughter, you are not getting any younger. When will Victor pay your bride price?" Rebecca forced a smile, unwilling to acknowledge the seed of doubt her mother had planted. "Mama, you worry too much. Victor loves me. We've been building together. When the time is right, he will propose." Her mother shook her head. "And who told you the right time will come? You are giving him everything a wife gives, but he has not given you the respect of making you his wife." "My daughter, open your eyes." Rebecca dismissed it. She knew Victor. He was ambitious, focused, and determined to secure a solid future for them. Marriage was a big step, and he wanted to make sure everything was perfect first. Or at least that's what she told herself. But then came 5 years, 5 long years, 5 years of waiting. The topic of marriage had become a carefully avoided landmine. She had tried everything, subtle hints, direct conversations, even playful teasing. But Victor always had an answer ready. "Why are you rushing, Becca? Marriage is for eternity. We need to be sure we're ready for that commitment. You know I love you, right? Then why do you doubt me? Becca, are you listening to your mother again? You want to let people ruin what we have because of society's pressure." And every single time she believed him. Maybe he was right. Maybe rushing was a mistake. Maybe what they had was too precious to be forced into a timeline. He was always so reassuring, so convincing. And when he saw the doubt creeping into her eyes, he would pull her close, kiss her softly, and whisper against her skin, "I promise you are my forever. Just be patient, my love," and that was all it took. Every time she considered pushing further, he would calm her fears, drown her doubts in affection, and silence her questions with tender words. And so she waited while the world moved on. As Rebecca waited for Victor, other men came seeking her hand in marriage. They were men of good character, men who saw her worth and were ready to cherish and honor her in the way she deserved. There was Tunde Edisina, a kind-hearted pharmacist who had built a reputable name for himself. He had approached her mother first, stating his intentions before coming to her directly. "Rebecca, I see a future with you. I want to build something real, something lasting." But she had smiled politely and said, "I'm in a relationship." Then there was Emeka Ace, a banker who was deeply rooted in family values. He was patient, respectful, and had spoken to her with gentle sincerity. "You don't have to answer now. Just think about it." You deserve a man who sees your worth, Rebecca. But her heart was already taken. I love someone else, and so she turned them all down, one after the other. Victor was the only man she wanted, the only one she had sacrificed years for. She couldn't walk away now. Not after all she had invested in this relationship. Patience, they said, was key. So she held on, despite the quiet warnings in her heart, despite the concern in her mother's eyes, despite the disappointment in her friends' voices. Rebecca, what are you waiting for? You've given him 5 years of your life. If he wanted to marry you, he would have by now. Men like Victor never change. One day he will leave and you will regret wasting your time. But she refused to believe them. Victor loved her, she knew he did. Didn't he always come home to her? Didn't he still hold her in his arms at night? So what if he hadn't proposed yet? He would, he had to. Deep down there were moments of doubt, moments when the silence in their home felt too loud. Moments when she caught him looking at his phone with a small smile, quickly locking the screen when she walked in. Moments when he would stay out late, claiming work had kept him back. Moments when he would barely acknowledge her presence, offering vague excuses for his coldness. But she had learned to ignore those moments. She chose to remember the good days, the laughter, the love, the warmth. She chose to believe that patience would reward her. That one day, Victor would take her hand, look into her eyes and say, "Becca, will you marry me?" If only she knew what was coming. If only she had listened before it was too late. For years people had tried to warn Rebecca. They had spoken gently at first, offering words of advice wrapped in concern. Are you sure Victor is serious about you? A man who truly wants to marry you will not take this long. You deserve better, Rebecca. Why are you waiting for someone who is not waiting for you? But she had turned them all down, every single one of them. Her mother, her best friend Anita, even her colleagues at the small event planning agency where she had finally secured a job, they had all seen what she refused to acknowledge. Victor had no plans to marry her, but she was stubborn. She had spent too many years loving him, too much time believing in their future. How could she walk away now? Eventually, people stopped talking. They grew tired of trying to convince a woman who refused to see the truth. The distance grew, subtly at first. Conversations that used to be filled with warmth and laughter became brief and indifferent. Anita, once her closest confidante, no longer asked about Victor. It was as though people had given up on her. Rebecca felt the shift, but she refused to let it bother her. She knew what they all thought of her, that she was blind, desperate, wasting her time. But she would prove them wrong. Her 32nd birthday was approaching fast. She had been with Victor for 5 years and now she was about to turn 32. The thought made her stomach churn. She wasn't getting younger, why wouldn't he just propose? She tried not to panic. 5 years was a long time, but wasn't love supposed to be patient? Hadn't she done everything right? She had stayed, been loyal, remained understanding. She had trusted the process, trusted him. And then, 1 week before her birthday, Victor told her he had a surprise for her. She could still remember how casually he had said it. They had been sitting on the couch in their apartment, watching a movie she wasn't really paying attention to. His arm was draped lazily over her shoulder, his attention half on his phone. "By the way, babe," he said, almost as an afterthought, "I have something planned for your birthday." Rebecca's heart leapt. She turned to him, excitement flickering in her eyes. "Really? What is it?" Victor smirked, locking his phone and placing it on the coffee table. "Now if I tell you, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it?" Her hands clenched in anticipation. She studied his face, searching for any clue, any hint of what was coming. A proposal. It had to be. Why else would he plan something for her birthday after all these years? She felt lightheaded. A nervous, bubbling excitement filled her chest. "Is it big?" she asked playfully, nudging him. Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "Just be patient, Becca." Patience. Hadn't she been patient enough? Still she didn't push. She didn't need to. She had already convinced herself. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning and daydreaming. She wasn't sure what Victor had planned, but she assumed it was a proposal. What else could it be? She imagined it over and over again. The moment he would get down on one knee, the look in his eyes, the ring glittering under the lights. Her heart raced just thinking about it. She didn't want to be caught unprepared, so she began planning. She went shopping for a new dress, something elegant and breathtaking. She picked a gown that hugged her figure perfectly. It was simple yet regal, a dress worth a proposal. She made an appointment at Glitz and Grace Salon, ensuring her hair and makeup would be flawless. She even invited her mother and Anita. First, her mother hesitated. "Rebecca, are you sure about this? Has he told you exactly what the surprise is?" "No, Mama," she admitted, "but I just have a feeling. After all these years, he wouldn't go through all this trouble if it wasn't important." Her mother didn't look convinced, but she sighed and nodded. "I hope you're right, my daughter." Anita was more skeptical. "Are you sure you're not assuming things, Becca? What if it's just a dinner and nothing more?" "Anita, please," she scoffed. "Why would he plan something special for my birthday if it wasn't serious? Victor knows how much I want this. He wouldn't disappoint me." Anita's expression was unreadable, but she didn't argue. Instead, she forced a small smile. "I hope it's everything you want it to be." Rebecca couldn't wait. She imagined the moment 100 times, picturing the tears in her mother's eyes, the cheers from her friends, the warmth of Victor's hand in hers as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Everyone said her patience had finally paid off. "See? You were right to wait. You were right to believe in him." She smiled at the thought. The night before her birthday, she could barely sleep. Her heart was too full of hope. She was ready for her happily ever after. If only she knew what was coming. Rebecca woke up feeling invincible. It was her birthday, the day she had been waiting for, the day she had dreamt about 1,000 times. Victor had already made the morning special. He had woken her up with soft kisses, whispered a sweet, "Happy birthday, my queen," and even made her breakfast, something he rarely ever did. "Tonight is going to be special," he told her as they ate together, his smile holding a secret. "I have something planned just for you." Her heart raced. A proposal, her mind whispered. What else could it be? She felt like the happiest woman in the world. Her patience had paid off. Victor left for work, and she spent the rest of the day preparing for what she was sure would be the most magical night of her life. She called her mother. "Mama, don't forget 7 o'clock at Royal Crest Restaurant." "I won't forget, my daughter," her mother assured her, happiness in her voice. She called Anita. "Are you coming?" "Of course, Becca. I wouldn't miss this for anything." Everyone was excited. Everyone was expecting something big. She picked out her dress, had her makeup done flawlessly, and even rehearsed in front of the mirror what she would say when Victor finally got down on one knee. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes," she whispered, smiling at her reflection. She had waited for 5 years, and now she was about to become his forever. If only she knew. She arrived at the restaurant just before 7, nerves buzzing under her skin. The place was perfect. Dimly lit, elegant, with soft music floating in the background. Minutes later, her mother walked in, followed by Anita and a few others. They were all smiling, whispering excitedly. "So this is where it finally happens," Anita said, squeezing her hand. Rebecca beamed. "Yes, finally." And then Victor arrived. He walked in, tall, confident, devastatingly handsome. But something was off. He wasn't looking at her. Instead, his gaze searched the room, locking onto someone else. Rebecca followed his eyes and saw a woman. She was young, stunning, with delicate features and a smile that lit up the entire restaurant. Rebecca frowned. Who was she? And then Victor did the unthinkable. He walked towards the woman. Then he knelt. Rebecca gasped. Her chest tightened. The room blurred. "No," she whispered, gripping the edge of the table. Everyone turned to watch. "Grace, my love," Victor said, his voice clear and strong. "Will you marry me?" A sharp, piercing pain shot through Rebecca's chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Grace gasped in joy, covering her mouth with her hands. "Yes, Victor, yes," she squealed, throwing herself into his arms. The restaurant exploded in cheers. Rebecca's ears rang. The betrayal was too deep, too raw, too unbearable. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. "Why?" The entire restaurant fell into stunned silence. Victor turned slowly, lazily, like she was an annoying fly buzzing in his ear. "Rebecca, please," he said, shaking his head. Don't embarrass yourself further." She was trembling. "How could you do this to me?" she choked, her voice barely a whisper. Victor smirked. "Do what, Rebecca? Did I ever promise to marry you?" She staggered back. "I waited for you for 6 years," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I gave you everything. I turned down suitors for you. I loved you." Victor scoffed. "And that was your choice." She froze. "What?" "Rebecca," he sighed as if speaking to a child. "You were just there, a convenience. A placeholder. I needed time to find the right woman, and now I have." The room spun. Her mother's voice snapped through the air. "Victor, you are a wicked man." Victor only laughed. "Oh, come on," he said, shaking his head. "Don't act like this is a surprise. Rebecca, did you really think you were wife material?" The words sliced through her. "You were desperate, clingy, always waiting for something that was never coming." The tears wouldn't stop. "You strung me along," she sobbed. "You strung yourself along," he corrected, his voice sharp and cutting. "You ignored the signs. That's not my fault." Pain ripped through her chest. "I sacrificed so much for you, and I never asked you to." Her mother grabbed her hand. "We are leaving now." Rebecca couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She had spent 6 years waiting for a dream that never existed. Her mother turned back to Victor, her voice filled with anger. "One day you will regret this, Victor." Victor only smirked. "We'll see about that." And with that, Rebecca walked out, shattered, humiliated, and broken beyond repair. Rebecca could barely feel her feet as she left the restaurant. It was as if her body had become weightless, numb, detached from reality. The sounds around her, car horns, passing voices, the distant hum of the city, felt muted far away. Her mother held her arm firmly, guiding her toward the waiting cab. Anita walked beside them, silent but watchful, as though afraid Rebecca might collapse any moment. She didn't remember the ride home. She didn't remember stepping out of the car or walking into her mother's house in Ogudu Estate. But she remembered the moment the door shut behind her. And then she broke. A sharp, painful wail escaped her lips as she sank on the floor. Tears poured freely, her shoulders shaking violently as sob after sob tore through her. Her mother knelt beside her, rubbing her back gently, whispering words of comfort. But they barely registered in Rebecca's ears. "I gave him 6 years of my life," she gasped between sobs, "and he threw me away like I meant nothing." Her mother sighed, shaking her head. "My daughter, I warned you. I tried to tell you, but you refused to listen." Rebecca knew. She had ignored the warnings, silenced the doubts in her heart, and now she was paying the price. "Mama, what did I do wrong?" she whispered, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. "Was I not enough? Was I not good enough?" Her mother wrapped an arm around her, holding her tightly. "Stop blaming yourself, my child. This is not your fault. Some men are simply wicked. You loved him, and he took advantage of that. But you will rise again, Rebecca." "You will." Rebecca wanted to believe her. But at that moment, her world had already shattered beyond repair. She spent days locked in her room. Her mother would bring food, but Rebecca barely touched it. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving the betrayal over and over again. Her mind was a whirlpool of pain, confusion, and regret. Victor's laughter echoed in her head. "Did you really think you were wife material?" Grace's bright, youthful smile haunted her dreams. "I was just there, a placeholder, a convenience." The humiliation burned deep like an open wound that refused to heal. By the 7th day, her mother had had enough. She stormed into the room, yanked open the curtains, and let the sunlight flood in. "You will not die because of one foolish man," she declared, her voice firm. Rebecca groaned, burying her face into the pillow. "Get up." "Mama, please," I said, "get up, Rebecca." Something in her mother's voice shook her. Slowly, she sat up, her body weak, her spirit drained. Her mother sighed, sitting beside her. "You need to face reality, my daughter. You left your things at his house. You must go and get them. Then you must move on." The thought of seeing him again made Rebecca's stomach turn. But her mother was right. She needed closure. She needed to take back what was hers. The final blow, a week later, Rebecca found herself standing outside Victor's apartment. Her hands trembled as she knocked on the door. She had refused to let her mother come with her. This was her battle to face. The door opened. Victor stood there, his expression unreadable. "Rebecca," he said casually, as if she were just a visitor, not the woman he had discarded like trash. "What do you want?" She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "I came to get my things," Victor sighed, bored, disinterested. He turned to someone inside. "Grace, bring her things." Rebecca's heart dropped. She had hoped, prayed, that he would at least have the decency to let her gather her belongings herself. But instead, Grace emerged from the room, carrying a small crumpled bag. Without a word, she threw it at Rebecca's feet. Rebecca flinched. "Take your things and leave," Grace said coldly. Rebecca's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" Grace folded her arms. "You heard me. You have no reason to ever step foot here again. Victor is my man now. You're nothing but a desperate, pathetic ex." Rebecca felt a sharp sting in her chest. She turned to Victor, hoping, foolishly hoping, that he would correct Grace, that he would say something to ease her pain. But he only smirked. "She's right," he said, leaning lazily against the doorframe. "I've moved on, Rebecca. You should do the same." Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She bent down, picked up her bag, and turned to leave. "Good girl," Grace sneered. Victor laughed. Rebecca kept walking. She didn't look back. The road to healing. When she arrived home, her mother took one look at her face and knew. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't press for details. She simply wrapped Rebecca in her arms and held her while she broke all over again. The following weeks were the hardest. Rebecca barely spoke. She avoided calls, ignored texts, and stayed locked in her room, drowning in grief. The world felt empty, meaningless. Her dreams of a future with Victor had crumbled into dust. She didn't feel like herself anymore. She didn't feel like living, but her mother refused to let her fade away. Every morning she knocked on her door. "Wake up, my child. You will not let a man destroy you." Every afternoon she sat by her side. "You are stronger than this, Rebecca. You will rise again." Little by little, the words started sinking in. And then one day, Rebecca did something she hadn't done in weeks. She got up, showered, dressed, and went back to work. The event planning agency welcomed her with open arms. Her boss was kind, understanding. "Take your time, Becca. We're here for you." Her colleagues encouraged her. Anita stood by her side. Day by day, she started rebuilding. She wasn't healed, not yet, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. She was still Rebecca Temitope, and one day she would be whole again. Rebecca had spent weeks drowning in grief, consumed by heartbreak so deep that she wondered if she would ever be whole again. But little by little, day by day, she began to piece herself back together. She threw herself into work, pouring all her energy into the event planning agency where she worked. If nothing else, she was determined to become the best version of herself, not for any man, not for validation, but for her own healing. At first, it was difficult. There were moments when she would sit at her desk, staring at nothing, and suddenly a memory of Victor would crash into her like a wave. She would remember the way he smiled at her when they first met, the way he held her at night, the way he had whispered empty promises that she had clung to for so long. And she would cry. The pain didn't disappear overnight. It clung to her like a shadow, a quiet ache that made her doubt herself. But the difference was, she no longer let it define her. She wiped her tears, picked herself up, and kept moving forward. With time, Rebecca immersed herself completely into learning. She took online courses, read books, and studied top-end planners, eager to build a name for herself. She went from merely working at the agency to becoming one of the most skilled event planners they had. Clients began requesting her by name. Her boss took notice. "Rebecca, your dedication is inspiring," her boss, Madam Ace, told her one afternoon. "If you keep this up, there's a promotion waiting for you." For the first time in months, Rebecca felt something other than pain. She felt pride. She was becoming a new woman. While Rebecca was rebuilding her life, Victor was beginning to see cracks in the picture-perfect future he thought he had secured. At first, everything seemed fine with Grace. She was beautiful, exciting, and she had a way of making him feel like the most important man in the world. But that feeling didn't last long. Grace was demanding, more than he had ever anticipated. She expected him to call her constantly, check in every hour, and make her his top priority. "Victor, why didn't you answer my call?" she would ask whenever he missed her calls, even if he was in an important meeting. "I was busy, Grace," he would reply, shaking his head. "Busy? Busy doing what that's more important than me?" At first he laughed it off. He had always been a man who could handle anything, and meeting Grace's needs was just another challenge he believed he could overcome. But the more time passed, the more he realized just how exhausting she was. She didn't just want his love, she wanted complete control. She had opinions on everything: where he went, who he spoke to, how he dressed. "I don't like that shirt, babe. Wear the one I picked for you." "Why do you still follow your female colleagues on social media? Unfollow them now." "Cancel your dinner plans with your friends." "I don't want you going out without me." Victor tried to brush it off. "She just loves me," he told himself. "She just wants to feel secure." But the more he excused it, the worse it got. And then there was the financial strain. Grace had expensive taste. She wanted designer clothes, five-star dinners, extravagant trips. And everything had to be perfect for the wedding. "Victor, I want our wedding to be the talk of the town. I don't care what it costs. I want the best of everything. I saw this diamond necklace that would go perfectly with my dress. Can you buy it for me?" At first he tried to keep up. He had always been a man of means. Money wasn't an issue. But Grace wasn't just expensive, she was insatiable. No matter how much he gave her, it was never enough, and slowly doubt began to creep in. He had never thought about Rebecca since the night he humiliated her. He had erased her from his mind, convinced himself that she was a mistake he had outgrown. But now in the quiet moments, he found himself comparing. Rebecca had never been this exhausting. She had never been this entitled. She had loved him without conditions. And though he pushed the thought aside, it always found its way back. If Grace is like this now, what will marriage be like? The question troubled him, but it was too late to turn back now. The wedding was already being planned, and Victor Obi never backed down from a decision, or so he told himself. But deep down, something in his gut told him he had made the biggest mistake of his life. A month had passed since Rebecca had chosen herself, since she had picked up the broken pieces of her life and rearranged them into something stronger, more beautiful. The event planning agency had become her safe haven, a place where she poured all her energy, all her emotions, until there was no more room for pain. She was no longer just another planner at majestic events, she was the best. Her name was now being whispered among top clients, her work sought after by high-profile individuals. Brides requested her expertise, corporate executives admired her precision, and socialites wanted only Rebecca Temitope to handle their events. Her transformation wasn't just professional. She had changed as a person, becoming more confident, more self-assured, more powerful in her own skin. Her mother saw the growth in her daughter and beamed with pride. "You see now, Rebecca," she said one evening as they sat in the living room sipping tea. "You thought that man was your future, but look at you now. You're thriving. You're everything you were meant to be." Rebecca smiled, her heart full. She no longer felt the weight of Victor's betrayal crushing her. She had stopped asking why and had started telling herself, it doesn't matter. Because truly it no longer did. She had survived, she had won, and Victor? Well, he was about to learn a lesson of his own. Victor had thought he had everything figured out. When he proposed to Grace, he believed he was making the right choice. She was young, beautiful, and exciting. But excitement quickly turned to exhaustion. Grace was not the woman he thought she was. She was possessive, entitled, and endlessly demanding. At first, he tried to ignore it. He could handle her. But then it became impossible. "Victor, why aren't you picking up my calls? I told you I don't like you going out with your friends. What is so hard to understand? You need to pay for my dress and my shoes and the spa appointment I booked today. What's the point of being engaged to a wealthy man if I still have to think about money?" Victor had always been a man in control. But with Grace, he felt like a prisoner in his own relationship. Everything had to be done her way. Every argument ended with her crying or threatening to leave. And the wedding was no longer about their love. It was about making a statement, about how much money he could spend. "I don't care if it's expensive, Victor. I want my wedding to be the biggest this city has ever seen." The demands were never ending. The more time passed, the more he realized he had made a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. And then one night, as they sat at a restaurant discussing wedding details, he snapped. "Grace, I can't do this anymore." She stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Victor exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I mean, this engagement is not working." Her face darkened. "Victor, are you joking?" "No, I'm not. This isn't love, Grace. I feel trapped. I feel exhausted. And I don't want to feel like this in a marriage." She slammed her fork against the plate. "So that's it? You're just walking away?" "I should have walked away a long time ago." Grace laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You're a fool, Victor. You think you're hurting me. You're the one who's going to regret this. You will never find a woman like me again." He didn't argue, he didn't need to. He just wanted her gone. And the moment she stormed out of his life, he felt relief. For the first time in months, he could breathe. But now there was nothing left to distract him. And that was when the regret crept in. Because now, in the quiet moments, his mind drifted back to Rebecca. Victor tried to push the thoughts away, but they came anyway. He had spent 6 years with Rebecca, and she had never once been manipulative, controlling, or suffocating. She had given freely without asking for anything in return. She had stood by him, believed in him, and loved him with everything she had. And how had he repaid her? By publicly humiliating her, by breaking her beyond repair. And now? Now she was thriving. Victor had heard the rumors. Rebecca Temitope was no longer just another woman. She was a force. Her event planning business was booming. Her name was everywhere. And suddenly he needed to see her, to tell her how wrong he had been, to ask for her forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, to get her back. The first place he went was her mother's house. But before he could even step inside, her mother chased him away. "You dare show your face here after what you did to my daughter?" she spat, standing in the doorway. "Mama, please, I just want to talk to her." "Talk to who?" "My daughter that you humiliated, that you threw away like trash? Get out of here before I curse you, Victor." The door slammed in his face. The next day he went to her office. He had to try again. At first, Rebecca refused to see him. But after his constant pleading, she finally agreed. She walked into the meeting room where he was waiting, looking more powerful, more confident than ever. Victor's breath caught in his throat. "Rebecca, his voice broke. All the words he had rehearsed, all the things he had planned to say, suddenly felt insufficient. Tears filled his eyes. "I was selfish. I was blind. I was a fool." Rebecca sat down, folding her arms, silent, unmoved. "You were the best thing in my life," he continued, his voice shaking. "And I threw you away like you meant nothing." "But you meant everything, Rebecca." "I know it now. I see it now." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. "Victor," she finally spoke, her voice steady. "You humiliated me. You broke me. Do you really think an apology is enough?" "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. He exhaled shakily. "I just want you to know that I regret it. And if there's even the smallest chance, I would do anything to fix what I destroyed." Rebecca studied him. Then slowly she smiled. "I'll think about it." Victor felt hope bloom in his chest. He left her office that day, convinced she would reconsider. What he didn't know was Rebecca was planning to humiliate him just as he had humiliated her. Victor felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. As he stepped out of Rebecca's office that day, he couldn't help but replay the moment in his head. The way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken so calmly, so thoughtfully, and then those words, "I'll think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. For a split second he had doubted it. It seemed too swift, too easy. He had expected Rebecca to be colder, to dismiss him completely. But instead she had left him with a possibility. And that was all he needed. "She still loves me," he convinced himself as he drove home that evening. That was the only explanation. Despite everything, despite the way things had ended, Rebecca still had feelings for him. And that was all that mattered. Rebecca didn't tell her mother the full truth. She didn't tell her about the plan forming in her mind, the storm she was preparing to unleash. All she said was, "Victor came to my office today." Her mother's spoon clattered onto the table. "What did that foolish man want?" she asked sharply, her face twisting in disgust. "He begged for my forgiveness." Her mother scoffed. "So, He can beg from now till the end of time. That doesn't change what he did. Rebecca hesitated, then sighed. I told him I'd think about it. Her mother's eyes darkened. Rebecca, don't tell me. Mama, she interrupted gently. Just trust me. But her mother wasn't having it. Trust you after what he did to you. After the way he humiliated you in front of the world. And now you want to. I know what I'm doing. There was a long pause. Her mother searched her face, looking for a sign, for something that would convince her that Rebecca hadn't lost her mind. Finally, she exhaled. If he hurts you again, don't say I didn't warn you. Rebecca simply nodded. She had no intention of being hurt again. This time she was in control. 2 days later, Rebecca sent Victor a message. Meet me at Bistro Royale by 7 p.m. Victor stared at the text for a long time. His heart pounded. This was it. She had thought about it, and she was ready to give him an answer. Excitedly, he prepared for the evening. He wore his best suit, got a fresh haircut, and even bought a bouquet of roses. He pictured the moment, her walking in, a shy smile on her face, saying that she wanted to start over. I knew she still loved me, he whispered to himself. What he didn't expect, however, was that he wasn't the only one invited. Victor arrived at Bistro Royale 20 minutes early. He wanted to be the first to see her, to set the tone of the evening. But when Rebecca finally walked in, his excitement turned to confusion. She wasn't alone. Her mother and her best friend, Anita, followed right behind her, taking their seats as though they were expected. Victor frowned. Why would she invite them? He brushed the thought aside. Maybe she wants their approval before making things official again. He rose to greet her, but she merely nodded and took her seat. No warmth, no emotion. He ignored the tension in the air. He had already rehearsed everything he wanted to say. So he spoke. He told her how much he had changed. How losing her made him realize his selfishness, his foolishness, his arrogance. How he had let go of grace, how he had finally understood what real love was. Rebecca, I don't expect you to forget what happened, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to make things right. To show you that I can be the man you always deserved. When he was done, he exhaled deeply, waiting for her reaction. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. And then Rebecca stood up. Victor's heart raced. She's going to say yes, he thought. She took a slow breath, looked directly into his eyes, and then said, You have some audacity, Victor. The words hit him like a slap. His smile faded. Excuse me, Rebecca leaned forward, her voice sharp. Did you really think you'd crawl back into my life after what you did? After you threw me away like garbage? And that I would welcome you with open arms? Victor's throat went dry. Rebecca, I know, she cut him off. You don't get to speak now. It's my turn. She straightened, her presence commanding, powerful. Then she let loose. You humiliated me in the worst way possible. You discarded me after 5 years like I meant nothing. You told me I was just there to pass time while you found the right woman. Victor's face fell. You laughed at me when I cried. You let me suffer, made me question my worth, made me believe I was nothing. Her voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of other guests. Victor shifted uncomfortably. People were watching, just like the night he had humiliated her. And now you want me back? She let out a cold, bitter laugh. Now you see what you lost, and you think you can just come crawling back? Rebecca, please, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She wasn't done. You are a selfish, arrogant, disgusting excuse for a man, Victor. You don't love me. You never did. You just don't want to live with the regret of what you did. His hands trembled. He had never seen her like this before. She took a step back, tilting her head slightly. Well, let me give you something to regret for the rest of your life. She exhaled sharply, then said the final words that shattered him completely. Same way you disgraced me in public, Victor. I've paid you back in full. Silence, cold, heavy silence. Victor's chest tightened, his vision blurred. This had never been about second chances. This had been revenge. Rebecca picked up her purse, turned her back to him, and walked away. Her mother, before leaving, paused beside him. She chuckled, shaking her head. I warned you, she muttered, but you thought you were untouchable. Look you now. She scoffed and walked away. Victor sat there frozen, eyes burning, face hot with shame, the weight of his own foolishness suffocating him. For the first time in his life, he had lost something he could never get back. And this time there was no fixing it, no undoing it. Rebecca was gone, and the regret would haunt him forever. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.